Have you seen the latest news that eating a half of an egg increases your risk of dying by 7%? I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at DietDoctor.com, and I've got to be honest, my first response when I saw this was, really? Here we go again? We're doing this again with eggs? But this time I think it was perfect because it shows how poor this data is and how inaccurate the data is. Because just in February, there was this post in PLOS Medicine, this article showing that eggs are associated with an increased risk of death. But just back in January, in the American Journal of Medicine, there was a meta-analysis showing there was absolutely no correlation, and in fact, there might be a correlation with lower risk of heart disease. So how do we put all this together? Well, we've written so many articles and posted videos about eggs. It's one of the most studied food group, that and red meat, that is so poorly misunderstood. So I think it could be helpful to go through the studies a little bit. I'll point out what I see as some of the important parts of the articles, and then how we can interpret this for ourselves as individuals about whether we should eat eggs or not, about whether there's harms or benefits about eggs. And let me start by saying we actually have a whole guide on eggs that Francisco Spritzler wrote at DietDoctor.com, which is great. It goes through all the great source of protein and the fat-soluble vitamins and inexpensive and then the science behind the health considerations for eggs. So that's a great place to start to really be a comprehensive guide to eggs. But let's go through these articles. So the first one, just published in February in PLOS Medicine, looked at 521,000 people, average age 62, and they were enrolled in the study back in 1995 and 1996, and then followed over years until like 2011, I think it was. It's a standard nutritional epidemiology, which is really low quality science, but they fill out food frequency questionnaires on a couple times during that whole period. So it's pretty poor data collection, but for that type of a study, it's about as good as you can get, even though it's pretty poor. And then they just crunch the data and say, okay, people who eat more eggs and less eggs, they do it by quintiles. So 5 different groups from the highest to lowest, and they compare the highest to lowest. And what they found was, in total, the hazard ratio, so the increased risk of death from any cause or cardiovascular death or cancer death, was 1.14 for people who ate the highest level of eggs compared to the lowest level. Okay, so what does that mean, 1.14? Well, let's put this in perspective. Right, the best observational studies were smoking and its relationship to cancer. And there, the hazard ratio is somewhere between 15 and 30. Not 1.15 to 1.30, but 15 to 30 for smoking and cancer. Here we're talking about 1.14. I mean, it almost couldn't get any smaller than that, which just shows if there is an effect at all, it is a tiny effect. But here's the problem. When an effect is that small, the rest of the study better be perfect to say there's any sort of a true interpretation we can make. But this study was far from perfect. When you look at the baseline characteristics of the people in the study, those who ate more eggs compared to those who ate less eggs. Let's see what some of the differences were. In the highest quartile, there were more males. They had higher body mass index to start. They had lower education at baseline. Smokers, there were 15% smokers versus 6% smokers in the lowest quintile. They were less physically active, those who were physically active more than 5 times a week. 16% in the highest quintile, 25% in the lowest quintile. The people who ate more eggs were less likely to take vitamin or aspirin, and they ate less fiber and less veggies. Okay, so right away, this study is just so confounded by healthy user bias, or what you could say is unhealthy user bias, because what was the main message in 1995 and 1996 when these people were enrolled was that eggs have cholesterol, cholesterol is dangerous for your health, don't eat eggs. That was the health message. So when you look at 500,000 people, the people who are more likely to be eating eggs are also the people who are less likely to be taking care of their health. And that's what's shown by taking aspirin or taking a multivitamin, physical activity, smoking. I mean, all these things. Eating eggs didn't cause people to smoke, didn't cause people to have a lower education, didn't cause people to not take a supplement. But that's the exact same conclusion as if we said eating more eggs caused people to have more heart attacks or to die more. It's the same level of evidence to draw that conclusion. And that's not what these studies are designed for. That's not how we should be interpreting these studies, because it's such low quality data. It's actually much more likely to be false and statistical noise than it is to be true, in my opinion, based on these baseline characteristics. So now let's compare that to this study that just came out 1 month prior. 1 month prior, in the American Journal of Medicine, it was the systematic review of prospective studies looking at egg consumption. And here they used 23 studies with 1.5 million people. So a much bigger cohort, 1.5 million people. And higher egg consumption had absolutely no association with cardiovascular events, heart attacks and strokes. And there was actually a slight decreased risk for people who had more eggs for actually having documented coronary artery disease. All right, so now how do we interpret this one? Well, it's still prospective nutritional epidemiology. It's still low quality studies. So I would never use this to say, see, this shows eggs reduce heart disease. No, same caveats apply. You can't make that conclusion. But here's the thing. If eggs were so bad for us, if eggs clearly had a negative effect on our health, then a study like this should pick that up. Absolutely. But the fact that this study shows no association and maybe even a decreased association based on all the caveats, it seems pretty clear eggs can't be that harmful for a study in 1.5 million people to not even pick it up. So that's where I think these observational studies and combining these observational studies can be helpful. Again, not to prove cause and effect, but to really show that all this discussion about eggs being harmful is pretty silly from a scientific standpoint. So that's what I think is so important about this time, because the two studies just juxtaposed each other so perfectly and really point out the nuances and the specifics of these nutritional epidemiology studies so well. So I hope this was helpful. We also have a guide on, understanding observational studies versus clinical trials. We have that at Diet Doctor as well. So you can go to the site at dietdoctor.com to kind of learn more about our thoughts on these things. But hopefully this helps you understand the science behind eggs. If you enjoy eggs, if you think they're a good source of protein and fat-soluble vitamins, you want to eat them, there's really nothing in these studies to suggest that you shouldn't. But if you don't like eggs, all right, then you don't need to eat them. It's up to you. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.